Hello and welcome to Control Delete Tutorials. Today we'll be looking at Autodesk Mudbox 2015. This is an intro to the software and its user interface. I plan on doing some other videos where I take you through some techniques and things of that nature, but just to start out I want to cover the interface. So if you go to Autodesk's website and you download Mudbox 2015, when you open it up, one of the first things you'll see is the welcome screen here. And under here we can kind of open projects. We can use some starting projects that are over here, so basic head, human body, sphere, stuff like that. And then it'll show some of your recent files here on the side. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start with the sphere just so I can kind of show some things. I'm going to go ahead and turn on, you'll probably see the grid already turned on when you start. And you'll probably also see the wireframe may be on. So I'm just going to have that on, so that way whenever I'm looking around the environment you can kind of see what I'm doing. So starting off, I'm just going to go through some of the more important things that pertain to a new user in this menu up top, and then I'll move over onto the side and then some of the tools that are down in the bottom. So starting out, we have File, which is where we're going to have our open, save, and we have these great send features, so we can send our files directly to Maya, or we can send them directly to 3ds Max, and then some export features there. Moving to the Edit tab, we've got Undo, Redo, we can duplicate objects. We can delete selected objects, select all, things of that nature. Freezing, which will allow us to freeze our objects so they can't be sculpted. If you don't know about Mudbox, it's basically a digital sculpting program, very much like ZBrush. And then kind of moving on, we can create some basic meshes. These are the same starting meshes that we see in the welcome menu. We have curves, which I can explain curves a little bit in another tutorial and kind of show their use. Cameras and lights, you don't really have to mess around with that too much for just sculpting. If you're going to render something and create a video showing the render, that's where you want to mess around with that. The materials, again, something that I can cover a little bit more in another video. I want to do one on texturing and materials, so I'll keep that for another video. And again, if I skip things, it's just because for an intro and for people that are new to the software, there are things that may not necessarily make sense at this point, so I'm going to skip them at this time. Under Mesh, so this is where we really get into the strengths of Mudbox, which is adding new subdivision levels. If we look at the sphere that we have here, let's turn this off because I have mirroring turned on currently. I'm just going back to my sculpting tools here. But over on the mesh that we have here, if we look at this, you can see the polygons that make up this mesh, and what we're able to do is add a subdivision level. So we can see that is Shift D. We also have options for these subdivision levels, and if I click that, we are going to, by default this should be checked. I probably during the last project I was having have unchecked that, but by default smooth positions is going to be checked, and typically you're going to want this unless you're working on things that are very angular or like a harder surface, like metals and vehicles and armor and things of that nature. But typically that's going to be checked, so I'm just going to turn that back on there. And there are other options here, again, another video for those. So if I add a new subdivision level, we can see that it has subdivided our polygons that we've already had here into more polygons. And if we look, we can see that the shortcut for this is Shift D. So we're going to do Shift D. And you can see we can just keep adding levels here, and we'll see the new levels pop up here and the new poly count pop up here. What I tell people is once you get to a little over 1 million polygons, you're going to want to be careful with the software, because if I subdivide again, I'm going to get into about 5 million polygons, and stuff is going to start not working so well. So right now you can see there's quite a lot of polygons here, enough that we can do a demo. I'm going to hit W now to turn the wireframe off, which that is under the display menu, so we'll get back to that. We can step up and step down using page up and page down our subdivision levels. So I'll turn W back on just for a second so we can see this. So if I hit page down, something tells me that there might be in my Adobe Captivate software that I use to record these videos, there might be a hotkey in there for page up and page down, and hopefully it's not stopping my recording or anything like that, but it's probably overriding Mudbox's use of page up and page down. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the menu here to do this. And normally I'd be able to use that, but like I said, my software that I'm using to record might be overriding that. And so we can see we're on level 2. If I step down again, level 1 and level 0. So this is the original base mesh that we have here. And so each level up that I go from here, you can see it's smoothing out and adding subdivisions here. So I'll just keep stepping this back up till I think I was on level 6. Yep. Okay. So again, I'm going to turn off the wireframe by hitting W again. I'm going to turn off the grid too, because right now I don't really need it. Well, actually, I'll keep it on so you can see me rotating. So for navigating this viewport, it works very much like Maya or Unity if you've used either one of those, where we hold the Alt button and we right click to zoom in and out, hold Alt middle mouse click to pan, and Alt left click to rotate around. Just so you know what I'm doing here. We can delete the highest level, so if I realize that number 6 I don't need 1.5 million polygons, I can step down. If we hit W here, we'll see that we're now on level 5, and I can say delete highest level. You always have to step down before you do that, because if you're on a current level and you try to delete, it's going to tell you cannot remove the active level. Okay, and I'm going to keep this at level 5 for just now. Mudbox does have some mesh reduction and retopologizing features to it. These are really handy if you're working on something that you maybe are going to get 3D printed. A lot of 3D printing companies that you send to have a file size limitation, or some of the machines have a polygon count limitation as well. And so these will help you lower your poly count while keeping your model looking kind of the way you want them to, but they can be a little finicky, so it's a little bit of trial and error with some of those. If we've sculpted and we want to flip the mesh around, we can do that. We can make the mesh symmetrical on both sides. Again, can be a little finicky. I'm going to kind of move forward here. So we can frame selection, that's press A, so that's if we are zoomed out and I press A, it will just zoom in on what I am working on or have selected. We can hide and show objects. We can change our shading here, so if I were to step down we'd actually see this a little bit better, but it gets rid of some of the smooth shading that we have. We're just going to keep that on. If we're working with our textures, we can do flat lighting, which will get rid of any shading in the viewport, which will allow us to see exactly what we've painted and how it ends up looking. There's our wireframe. Turn that on and off. I'll just leave that on for now, I guess. Let's see, we can turn off the lighting, but then we won't be able to see anything. It's different than flat lighting, which turns off the shading, basically, the shadow. We can turn on and off the grid, turn on and off meshes. If we import a mesh from 3ds Max or Maya and it has errors, it will we can check this to show where the errors are so we can fix them, and uncheck it to turn that off. We can turn on and off curves and curve points, which we're not showing curves in this video, but that's where that would be. And then we can change the background here, so instead it's just a flat background instead of I prefer just the way the gradient looks here. Full screen mode and expert mode. Full screen mode would be actually a little better for recording because it cuts away the Windows display. And we'll keep that like that for the video, I guess. And then expert mode. I'm no expert, and I'll probably never work in this mode. I work well in the software, but I like having my interface here. I don't know all the shortcuts, so that's what that would be for. Create UVs. This is if you had an object that you brought in that wasn't UVW unwrapped. If you don't know what that is, I have videos that show how to unwrap and what that is. But if we don't have those, you could create UVs. I don't recommend this. It's always better to do the unwraps yourself. Flatten to UV space is a nice tool. It allows us to flatten the object. This is what the object's UVs look like, and these are just a coordinate system that lets us know what the polygons here match up to so that we can paint on them. PTEX setup, that'll have to be another video, and extracting texture maps, again, that'll go into another video as well. Then under render, we can save images. We can record a movie, which will record us actually doing a full sculpt, which is kind of cool. And then we can create a turntable movie, which I have a video on this as well. And then under the windows, we just have some of our preferences and stuff that we can get to. If any of the hotkeys that I'm using don't match up with what you're using, you may want to check your preferences, and I believe under, I don't know if we have the option in here to change this. I don't see it, but you may see that there is a setting in here to make it work more like 3ds Max or another software, and you want to be using the Mudbox version. I don't see that option in there, so that might be on older versions of Mudbox. Okay, so that takes us through the top here. We have our 3D view, we have our UV view, which shows us our UV coordinates, image browser, which we're not going to get into, and Mudbox community, which we're also not going to get into. To talk about the side here, this is where all of our settings are for any of our tools. It's kind of like the command panel in Max, or the attribute panel in Maya. So I'm going to move down here and talk about our different sculpting tools, and then the different options that we have over here for these. So starting out, we have our different brushes. All of these brushes, if it turns out that yours are not in the order that mine are, that's because you can simply hold middle mouse and click and move these around however you need. So if you end up using certain brushes, it makes it a little easier if there are ones that you use all the time. So anyway, we have our sculpting tools here. We have our paint tools, which work very much like painting in Photoshop. The curve tools, which again, another video. The pose tools, that'd have to be another video as well. And then select and move, which you shouldn't have to select and move too much stuff, depending on what you're working with and what your setup is. Okay. Over here we have different stamps, which I'll show those. Stencils, which we'll show. Different fall-off tips for our sculpting and paint tools. Material presets, so in case we don't like the color that we had there, we can try different material types. If you wanted to have like some sort of reflective material, you could have that. We're just going to stick with, I'll just put this, where's my default? Silicone light, default. So I'm just going to put that back on. I'll go ahead and turn off our wireframe at this point since we're going to start sculpting. So over here, when I select sculpt, I'm going to get settings here if I'm under my sculpt tab. So up at the top I've got new layer, I can create new layer groups or folders for our layers. When I create a layer, this layer is only active on whatever level of detail I'm currently on. So change my brush size smaller here. So to change our brush sizes, you can use the left and right brackets, just like in Photoshop. I can kind of tab through or increment the size. Down below those, I can use the colon and quotation. These are going to change my strength. So you can see here, if I hold the buttons, or I can just kind of tab through them, they change the strength of my brush. Typically, I will try to have my strength set to be about the same size as my brush or lower. If I go beyond that, it just means it's going to affect a lot stronger, of course. So the sculpting, the way this will work is I can just click and drag, and we can kind of see what that creates. I'm going to hit undo. I'm going to look at my fall off, because based on how I had that, this is the one that you're going to default to. It's the second one here. They number them based on 0, 1, 2. So you'll see this one that has this ease in and ease out. And so you'll see something that looks a little more like that. So these fall off control the tips that we have, or they work kind of like the tip. So you can see here, this kind of, just like this shape, it eases out and eases back into the mesh. So I can kind of just show you. Let me change my strength here. The other options we have for changing our strength is I can use B to change my brush size. So I can click B and then click and drag with the left mouse button. And I can use M to change my strength as well. So let me kind of show this. So you can see this one kind of comes up to a point, just like this. You can see that one's more of an angle there. This is the ease in and ease out one. And you can kind of see how they go from here. This one's kind of strange because it's basically doing what this one does, but at a lower strength. And then there's this flat one, which is going to give you a very, very hard kind of extrusion out of here. And then there's this, you should have this kind of very obtuse rounded one. And if you're not seeing this, make sure you're checking to see what level you're on. Because if you don't have subdivisions and you're not using a lot of polygons, you're not going to see this. So I'm going to undo. Let's see if I can undo back here. Control Z. No, it's not letting me. But what we can see here is on the sculpting layer that I have, it has this 5 next to it. That means that this was done on level 5. If I come back down and I step down to level 4, you'll see this no symbol, which means I can't sculpt on this, and I'll get a message telling me that. I'd either have to create a new level, or I could do it on my original sphere here. So you don't have to have levels. Levels are really good for levels are good if you want to maybe just try something out on your mesh. The other thing that levels are good for, I'm going to step back up to level 5, is that I can also change the opacity of them and bring these down. So you can kind of see how that works. So I've used my brush here, and I just left click and drag to get this to come outward. If you want to go inward, I can hold Control. Control will do the invert function. You can see it pushes in. So you can kind of see how that works. Or I can click invert and it will do that, and now Control will do the outward. Kind of weird. I wouldn't necessarily have that on. We do have mirror options here, so if I look at my X, will do whatever I do on one side on the other side. You can see it's not going to match it perfectly because of I've already sculpted over here. I could do my Y direction. And do that. My Z direction, so the front and the back. And then my local axes, which these are mostly going to be used if your pivot point when you imported this object in from another software was at a weird place. You might want to use these. Alright. Typically you're going to want to use X if you're creating somebody's face, because this is my front view and how that mirrors. I'm just going to go ahead and turn that off for the demo here. We have the option to use a stamp image, but just like fall off, if you see here, fall off is a tab here, and we can kind of control that fall off, or we can just use the pre-made ones, which typically I'll use the pre-made ones. But under the stamp here, we can also use stamps. So I'm just going to use this brick one, and I'm going to make my brush large and show you what that looks like. Kind of gives you almost like a reptilian skin look. Yeah, great. Under my stamp spacing, if I make this number larger, you can see this work a little better. And that's the same brick pattern that's there. I can change the orientation of this stamp here, so I can rotate that. So you can see the difference. I can flip them either direction. You can also turn on randomize. And so as I paint straight, you can see it changes them, the rotation. If I don't want the rotation to change, I can just turn that back down. And now it won't rotate weird. I'm going to undo back here just so I get some more blank space. This changes the scatter on the brush, so you can see here if I'm going to turn my brush down a little bit. If I change this scatter this way, you can see how they now scatter as I paint or as I sculpt. And if I turn that down, they don't do that anymore. If I turn the scatter up on the horizontal one, it changes the spaces horizontally along the brush stroke. This one changes the scale, so some will be smaller than others. And this one changes the contrast. So if I turn that down, they'll all have the same depth. If I turn it all the way up, you can see I'm getting some variation where some aren't out as far. This allows you to have kind of, it gives you a little more variety in the brush stroke. And let's turn random back off. So we already covered our brush stroke, or our stamp spacing. I'm going to turn my stamp back off. If you did notice when I used this pointed brush, it gave me these kind of dots based on the default that we had here. I think before it was like 6, might have been the default. And you can see that gives me these little dots. If I want to get rid of that or kind of not have that as much, I'll just turn that down to 0. And that makes it a lot smoother. Snap to curve, this is where curves would come in. So if I create a curve, I'm going to create a circle, which will display on my screen here. And right now, we're not snapping to that, even though this says snap. I'm going to come down into my object list. This is where I have all of my objects. So I have my sphere here, and I also have my curve that I just added. And I'm going to tell this curve to be snappable. I'm going to come back to my Layers tab here, come back to my sculpting brush, and now you'll see that as I move close, it's going to snap to there. So if I wanted to have a perfect circle sculpted here, I could do that. Now, as I go over top of an area, it's going to raise up a little higher. But you can see I get a really nice circle. And if I zoom in, I'm going to hold Control, make my brush a little smaller. Now I could push in, follow that same curve. There we go. Looks like the things on the side of Mega Man's helmet. If I don't want that curve there anymore, I find it to be a nuisance, I can just simply come over into the object list, right click on it and say delete curve, and then it won't be in there anymore. And that goes for any object we have in the scene. Okay, so back to the sculpting brush. Just turn that off. There's no curves, but I'll just turn it off for now. And I'm going to undo back. To get rid of the sculpt there. Next we have Steady Stroke. This is a really nice tool. So as I click and drag now, I won't actually start sculpting until I've extended past this line that they're giving me. And what that allows me to do is make very straight lines, which is nice. If I turn this down a little bit, you can kind of see how this works. So it kind of tows the sculpting brush behind it. And this makes it so even if I'm like wiggling around a lot while I'm drawing, it gives me a very nice smooth lines. I'll turn that off. If I use the flood feature, it will be kind of weird. So what it's going to do is flood the entire object with the same brush stroke, and we'll see it expand out in all directions, and it made everything over here really fat. So I'm just going to undo that. We already covered fall off down here. And under advanced, we have remember size. I have this checked on mine. Yours may not be checked by default. Remember size is nice because if you're switching through a bunch of different brushes, it will remember the size that you were last using on that specific brush. If you don't have it checked on any of the brushes, it will stay the size that I'm using it currently on all brushes. Orient to surface. We can see here as I go around the surface here that my brush will change based on that. If you're using a tablet, these are your pen pressure settings. So you have a minimum and a maximum strength. Okay, so that takes you through everything that we have over here for our brush. Next brush that we're going to cover is smooth. So you can kind of see what smooth does. It smooths things out. But you really never have to use this. You never have to click over here, because while we're in our normal sculpt mode, if I just hold shift, I will also switch over into the smooth brush automatically. So this allows me to sculpt and smooth and sculpt and smooth and kind of keep doing that. So I can just keep hitting shift and doing that. I'm going to get rid of the grid now. Bothers me. There. Now that we can kind of see that I'm rotating around rather than just it being a sphere. So yeah, so holding shift will allow us to smooth. But if I change the size, like if I told this to remember size and I made the size really big for this and I didn't remember that, then I might wonder if why I start smoothing over here in this tiny area, it starts smoothing really far away from my brush. So I do want to make sure that I either turn off remember size for this brush and just let it use the size that I'm using for my other brushes. Okay, next to this we have grab, or at least I do in mine, because I use grab a lot. Grab is really nice for when we're starting out and we're I'm going to start with a new shape here. So I'm just going to do a new scene. I'm going to use the basic head for this just to show you. So I'm going to hit Shift D to subdivide this guy a couple of times. I'll do one more. Okay, so I'm at 2 million polygons. You know what? Maybe we'll step down just for the recording, just so we don't start lagging. And I'm going to turn my brush down. Actually, no. For grab I normally will keep this pretty high. I'm going to turn mirror on in my X direction. And now what I can do is use grab to kind of start changing features of this character. So let's say I want him to have like sunken in cheek, like a very gaunt sort of face. You can kind of see how this works. Pull back the eyes a little bit and maybe give him like a, that's a little too big there. Maybe give him like a hooked nose. Just smooth that out. So you can kind of see that's what grab is really good for. It's for moving things around. So if I wanted his shoulders to be like much bigger, makes it really nice for doing things like that. If I want him to be sad. Oh, he's sad. So that's what grab is good for. Grab also has another feature, grab silhouette. This is really good because if I don't have this on and I start grabbing part of the face, I start pulling this forward thinking I'm pulling out his chin, I may end up giving him like a weird butt chin sort of thing. Not that butt chins are weird, but you know, if I don't want that for my character. So I turn on grab silhouette, and now it's going to grab all the way through my mesh. Even if I'm all the way back here, it's grabbing everything there all the way through. Wax is a really nice tool. Wax works really nicely for kind of building up material. So just to kind of show you, let me make my strength here up, bring my brush size down. Okay, so if I go over an area over and over, I can kind of make these overlaps. Kind of like that. Can't really do that with the sculpting brush. If I'm to use it, tried the same thing. Change my tip here. Bring my strength down. You can see it doesn't do the same thing. So wax is good for this type of stuff. Especially if I'm doing like character's teeth and I want to, let's say we can see all of his teeth here on the outside of his face, which would be weird, but I can kind of, build these up over top of one another. Okay, so I had to stop recording for a second, so we're just going to pick back up with the wax tool. And I've actually changed my settings now in my recording software so that I can hit page up and page down to change the levels here, which will make it a little more natural for me while I'm recording. But we had left off on the wax brush, and I was showing how you could kind of use it. So if you do happen to see the levels up here change, you know I just hit page up or page down to do that. But what I was showing you is how you can use it for things like overlapping some teeth or details like that. I had the strength really high too whenever I was doing that, so I'm going to go ahead and bring that down. So what I wanted to show is how you can kind of use this to create teeth that are in front of each other as they're kind of coming around here. And I'm just kind of doing this a little haphazardly, but just so you can get an idea. And then when I do the next set of teeth, those will overlap. Well, those are big teeth. Those will overlap the other ones, so you can kind of see how that can kind of work. So if he was some sort of monster, I guess. but you can see how that would work. And if I was doing the same sort of thing where maybe there was part of the mouth coming down over that, I can end up overlaying that part, and then I would just smooth the upper part here. Oh, computer's slowing down here a little bit. Let me see if my smooth here is set really high or something. Oh yeah, it is. Okay, no wonder. Set that back down. There we go. And so then I can just smooth this back into the face. There you go. And I could probably use wax again to kind of come down a little bit on the strength again. You can kind of overlay these things. And just smooth it out. Go back to smooth here and turn the strength on that up. So as you're sitting here sculpting, again, that's what wax is really good for, is just for overlaying things. Oh, that's a weird mouth, really low. It's okay though. So I'm going to just step back here a little bit. Just undoing. So I can take you through some of the other ones. So the bulge tool is really nice if you're wanting to expand areas. Like if I was going to make his nose fatter. Let's see, strength is really low there. And so if I wanted to do something like that, or kind of give him a more pronounced eyebrow. The other thing that I find that it's really good for is, let's say I want to mix a couple of things together. So I'm going to use the Sculpt tool with this pointed brush, and I'm going to set this to kind of small, and I'm going to cut in on his face, which I'm sure he appreciates. Now I'm going to use bulge, and I can bulge the area around it, which is going to push that crease even further together. So it'd be really good if I wanted to do some sort of like cuts and things like that to the character. And so you can see how that kind of works there. We have the flatten brush, which the flatten brush is good if you want to flatten areas. This works really nicely if you're doing say like really hard surface or armor, things like that. So you can kind of take an area and make it have more of an angle to it. This works really nicely with that orient to surface. So we can get this, I'm going to get more of a obtuse brush. And so we can get these like really chiseled sort of features using flatten. And then always remember to use smooth. And so that's what flatten is good for. Okay. Pinch. Pinch is kind of the opposite of bulge. It's going to make areas more narrow. Let me turn my strength. Oh, strength is actually pretty high up on that. So you can see there, it's making the area of the nose here smaller. And so it just kind of pinches areas together. Okay. Imprint. What happened to my layers? Oh, I switched to a different thing. There was something I wanted to show with layers. So I'm going to add a layer to him again, just for the next parts here, just so we can see that. So I'm going to use Imprint, and I'm going to go through Imprint. I'm going to go ahead and move. You'll probably see that Imprint and Spray and Repeat are kind of stacked up here together. Okay, Freeze, get out of the way. There we go. Because they really rely on the stamps. So with Imprint, I'm going to pick what it is I want to imprint on him. So I'm just going to pick one of these kind of at random. So I'm going to pick this one here. If I highlight over it, you can see it says leaf vein. And what this will allow me to do is I can click and drag, and it will imprint that design. And the way it does this is, if we see the white areas are being pulled out and the black areas are being pushed in. If I hold Control to do the opposite, it'll do just the opposite, where the white areas go in, the black areas are pulled out. If I look at my fall off here, right now it's set to a very sort of flat, just barely rounded on the end fall off. So if I set this to something that's a little more, let's go with this one that's more pointy, and I do this, we'll see we get a nice fall off towards the edge here, and even more so right here. You can kind of see how that works. And if I set my strength really low here, kind of see how you can take this and overlay it over other ones. And try to match up some things here. Now what I'd probably do is I'd probably not keep mirror on for this, because as you can see, if you end up using that, I mean, unless you want the design to be mirrored, I would normally turn that off, just because it gives you kind of an unnatural sort of look. But anyway, you can kind of see what's going on there. You just kind of keep using that over and over again. So that's Imprint. Repeat is going to take a design and repeat it over and over and over again. So you can see how that's kind of working. It's taking this white area and that's getting pulled up the highest, depending on what brush we end up using. So if you wanted to, you know, give him some sort of weird neck muscle things, you could do that. But you can change the stamp on that as well. So if we wanted to repeat, you know, a different pattern. And this works very much like the stamp tool that we were already using on the sculpt, but it's already kind of defaulting to some of the settings that it might use, whereas with stamp we have to change a bunch of the settings to do that. Same idea with spray. So spray works like repeat, only it's more scattered. So you can see what that looks like. So I'd normally turn my strength down pretty low here. So it's going to give you a lot of kind of irregularity in that pattern, so you're not getting the same repeating pattern over and over again. Okay, and then freeze is really nice, because freeze can be used, let's say I didn't want to mess up this. Come on, freeze. Was the strength down really low? Strength is up. Why can't I freeze? It's really weird. Maybe it'll let me freeze the original? No. What is going on with this? Strength is up all the way. Oh, invert was checked. It probably won't be checked on yours, but so on a freezing area I'm going to turn it blue. Now what's nice about this is I can basically tell it to keep this area the way I want it to look. So I can freeze it out, and now I won't be able to sculpt over it. So if I was sitting here and doing this repeat or imprint, and I didn't want to mess up this part of his face for some reason, I can sit here and do this on everything, and then I'm going to come back to freeze. I'm going to hold Control to do the invert, and I'll erase the freeze from here. Or I can simply just go up to edit, unfreeze all. But it left his face without any of these marks where it was frozen. So that's a nice feature for freeze. Okay. We'll get to erase in a minute. I'll just move that back to where erase was. Foamy. Foamy works kind of like Sculpt, but it builds up more over the same overlap. So if I use Sculpt and I kind of keep going over areas, it will build up to a certain height and then it just kind of stops at that height. So you can see it's kind of stopped right here. Foamy, on the other hand, kind of works like an airbrushing tool where it'll continuously keep building and building and building and building, no matter how many times I go over it. And so it works really good if you had like some sort of very irregular sort of skin or something like that, and you just kind of kept going over this, and it will just keep doing that. Right now it has a stamp that it's using to create this pattern. It would normally look like that. Normally it would look, make my brush a little smaller here, and let me pick a rounded brush. And so you can see how it kind of works. It's a stranger sort of brush. It's kind of cool. We have Scrape, which it's kind of like Flatten, and it looks like it's kind of erasing, but it's not. It's basically like if you were scraping off layer after layer. Let me turn the strength up on it so you can really see what it's doing. So you can see it's like almost just removing areas. Turn that all the way up. It's almost like wax, but the opposite direction. So you can see as I just continually go over an area, I can just keep removing. So that's pretty cool. Fill is a really nice tool, so I'll show you what fill is good for. Let's say I've used wax and I've created a giant hole in this guy's head, and I've just kind of worked over and over again and really put a hole in there. So fill will allow me to fill that in, but it'll do it right up to the level of the rest of the skin around it. So I'll use fill, and I'll just keep going over this. Notice I made my brush bigger than the hole. And now I'll use smooth. And it's not a perfect fix, but it's done a pretty good job at getting rid of that hole. Okay. The knife tool, make this a little bit larger. Let's see here. I'll reset the knife tool back to default. My knife tool isn't set up for default. It's really good for making gouges. I don't know if there's a way to easily reset the any of the brushes. Not certain. I was hoping I could just hit reset on it and it would reset the brush back to how it would normally be used. Because right now it's not cutting in. It's actually working more like the sculpting tool. And that's what a lot of these tools are. The knife tool, I mean, try it out. It gouges in holes, or not holes, but like these very sort of cracked gouges. I don't really know how to describe it, but try it out. Unfortunately, mine's not set up that way, and I can't reset it easily. So the smear tool, you can see, kind of just smears. I guess if you wanted to make a character's face that looks like it was melting, this would be a good way to go about it. So you could do that. Oh good, I'm only doing it to one side, so really gives it that effect. Amplify takes what you already have here. Actually, if you highlight over these, it'll tell you kind of what it does. But Amplify will take what I already have, and it'll emphasize, and it'll emphasize what I have. So it'll pull out areas that are pulled out and push in areas that are pushed in. So as I just kind of use it here, you can see there, it's just amplifying what I've already got. I'm going to undo that. So erase will only work on the layers. So if I start erasing, and let me turn my strength all the way up here, you can see it is erasing what I've done on that layer. Like if I turn the layer off right now, it's going to keep all of this because I've done this just on the basic head, but it'll erase pretty much anything that I have back here that I had done on the layer. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up another head, just one that's kind of cleared off here. I'm going to subdivide it a couple times. 5 times. So I want to show you some of the really nice kind of stamps that are here, just to give you a better idea. One that I really like for hair is using a mixture between this one that's called Rake and this one called Fibers. Rake is really nice. Make my brush a little bit bigger here, and will give me more. I guess I'm already using kind of a pointed brush, but I'll end up using it to kind of overlay and to create hair, essentially. And normally I'll do it in a way that, let me go back here, that I'm overlaying this. Let me take my strength down a little bit here. But I'll kind of work and build up the hairs so they're kind of going over top of one another. You can also do this really nicely if we use the wax tool. It's the same thing. So wax and rake. Okay, so let me get my brush here. So with this, I'm going to have to turn my strength up higher. I can kind of come in and just overlay parts of the hair that I'm going to have. This also works really nice if you're working with a stylus instead of working with a mouse. But so I can use that, and then I'll use the Fibers one, and the Fibers more like the small hairs. So I'll turn my strength up here a bit. Whoa. And so again, I'll just sit here and kind of work this over top. You probably hear all of my pen or my mouse clicks. But these work really nicely for going in and just laying in detail for a character's hair. Okay. The last thing I'm going to show before I end this tutorial is the stencils. And the stencils work very much like the stamps, but they cover a larger area. So for instance, if I have, let's see, find a really good one. Those are just little dots. So this one has a bit of noise to it. It is called Grime Scratches. Okay. So with this, I'm going to have a stamp set to off, and my stencil is going to be set to the Grime Scratches one. So basically what it's doing is it's taking whatever image I have here. Let me turn my strength down a little bit on this. I'll make my brush larger just so we can kind of see this. And it's taking whatever image I have and sculpting with that. Just to give you another example. Over here you can see if I have the S key held and I right click, it's almost like zooming that image. Left click would be rotating it, and then middle mouse would be panning it. And so there you can kind of see that a little bit better. And obviously we would want this to blend a little easier, but let's see here. What other ones do we kind of have? They have a bunch of them for different types of cracks and skin. This one reminds me kind of like elephant skin. And we can just sculpt that directly onto it. And that's what the stamps are good for, or the stencils are good for. So like I said, works very much like the stamps. It's just can cover a bigger area. We can load in other images as stamps, so we can just do add stamp and load it in, and it'll put it at the end of our list here. Same idea with the stencils. So that'll basically conclude this part of the tutorial. I'll be doing another tutorial that'll cover some of the materials and texturing parts of Mudbox, and hopefully you guys will watch that one too. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, comment, and all that stuff. Let me know what other tutorials you'd like me to do, and I'll try to be consistent in making new tutorials. Thank you.